Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to Legal 123s, the ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd.
Thanks, Brad. As a business and healthcare law firm, we meet a lot of interesting people and learn their amazing stories. This season, we're entering the fancy season of a business, Brad. Our theme this season is buying and selling a business.
Yes, and for those who don't know, Michael, that's just one of the 4 seasons. What are all 4 seasons?
Well, Brad, we have the building season, starting a business. We have the operating season where you're running a business, the scaling season, growing a business, and where we are right now, buying and selling.
That's awesome. Well, Michael, I don't know if it's about you have the same sense of humor I do, but hot mic
Wait,
moments.
you don't know if I have the same sense of humor as you?
Yeah, because this is going to be different. I'm going to throw something different.
It's not 13-year-old humor?
We'll see.
Okay.
We'll see.
All right.
When people don't realize they're being recorded and they say something off the mic, so a hot mic. Have you seen any funny ones lately?
Well, yeah, of course. I'm only picturing the 13-year-old humor ones.
Okay.
So
Let's not do that.
I won't say those.
Okay.
Let me think. This one's kind of borderline anyway, but I'm going for it. I saw a video recently of a city council meeting where one of the councilmen excused himself mid-session with a huge audience to go and use the restroom.
Uh-oh.
Now, Brad, he didn't technically say why he was walking off, but him forgetting to turn off his mic left no doubt what he was doing.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
No bueno. Well, in 2023, during an NFL game, Travis Kelce got caught on a hot mic, and he was joking around with his teammates, and suddenly started singing, "I Believe I Can Fly." But what's funny about it was he was singing like he was going to be the next, winning singer of The Voice or something like that.
First of all, I'm proud of you for not singing just then.
I thought about it. You could see the brain cells kicking in there.
I was surprised pleasantly that you didn't. And I am starting to picture what it would be like if you just walked around with a hot mic all the time.
It would be fascinating, and most human beings would never talk to me again. But speaking of sports, I remember watching a PGA event where one of the commenters forgot that his mic was on and started detailing or more importantly, critiquing the sandwich he was eating. And he was saying, quote, "This turkey is so dry, it's like eating a Sahara desert." And it was so unexpected that everyone just busted out laughing.
Well, I think that's a little judgy, personally, as someone who has said multiple times that mayo is Satan's spawn. I can appreciate the dry sandwich and, in fact, prefer that. But pretty funny. Well, besides these sports stories, do you have any other hot mic things you want to share?
Let's go jump into the news. I had a news anchor that thought the broadcast had ended and started venting about their day, saying something like, "If I had to cover one more boring city council meeting, I might just run away and join the circus." Obviously, they weren't covering the one that you were referencing in the beginning.
Yeah.
But it was live broadcast, and the viewers just thought it was hysterical.
I saw one recently where the weatherman was reporting live from a storm and just started dog cussing his circumstances, and he was live on air.
That was a pretty good one. Well, that was local news stuff. MSNBC, which is national news, anchor Lawrence O'Donnell was caught in a hot mic once when he lost his cool, started shouting about "Stop the hammering up there." And it was all real raw at the moment. And you could tell he was very frustrated. And I thought it was hysterical, but it surprised a lot of different people.
All this is making me picture what it would be like if our podcast were live. I think we would have some really funny bloopers.
I think Kennedy would have to have a button to press every once in a while just to cut us off. She's shaking her head, agreeing with that. So let's jump into the movies real quick. Actor Chris Pratt is known for being a prankster in film and in TV. And when he was on Parks and Recreation, there's this famous blooper where Chris was playing his character Andy, and he makes this joke about Kim Kardashian that was completely improvised, and saying how Kim Kardashian is in Star Wars and she likes playing the Death Star. Well, the way he pitched it, the entire cast just busted out laughing. They couldn't stop laughing.
Well, the only thing that occurs to me is you you do realize, Brad, that you don't get points for saying Star Wars on every episode?
Well, not from you, but from my Star Wars club, I get
Oh.
extra credit.
Oh,
Yes.
okay, okay. Well, it's like when real life turns into a comedy sketch, all these hot mic moments. And they're good because they're just so authentic and spontaneous when they happen.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you want to share before we get into the real stuff?
Not really. I mean, not for the podcast, but what I love about these moments, it really shows the human side of people, especially with the people are so prim and proper and all polished and professional, and then in reality, they're just dog cussing somebody.
Yeah, I mean, I can't relate. I mean, you and I've never had any.
No.
No. Okay. Well, at least none that we know of. Well, let's move on. What does all this hot mic conversation have to do with today's show?
Well, in a typical M&A deal, there's a lot of negotiations between the lawyers. The client is not always even on every call or email chain between the attorneys, which is probably a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Today's show, we're going to go behind the curtain and tell the story about what happens during negotiations between lawyers, basically, capturing the hot mic moments, which are usually not very polished, much less professional.
Okay. Let's get into today's story.
All right, Michael, before we dive into today's story, what do you think most sellers' primary object is in an M&A deal?
To make a boatload of money, of course.
Yes, you're correct in that. I'm sure that's they're aiming for that, but be a little more strategic. I know you can do that. Think bigger picture.
Okay. Maximize value and ensure a smooth transition.
I 100% agree with that, and those should also be the goal of their M&A attorney.
Well, hopefully you're right. Hopefully they align. The attorney is there, to guide their client through the process, and so they should be aligned with trying to maximize value and ensure a smooth transition. To be fair, additionally, the attorney is a protector, and so their role is to be on the lookout for things that are traps for their client, the seller in this example, while still trying to meet the two goals.
Totally agree.
Okay.
So today we have some interesting characters that we'll bring in. The first character story happens to be an attorney. This attorney we'll call Jimmy Africa.
Okay, I'll bite. Why Jimmy Africa?
Well, every time we spoke with Jimmy Africa, he somehow still brought up about being a big game hunter and all the trips he would take to Africa for hunting, or his next plan for his next big African hunt. It happened more than one time.
Okay, fair.
Well, so Jimmy Africa was representing the seller, who happened to be the owners of this business. Our clients were two physicians who worked at the practice. They were not brothers. But after being on the call with them so many times, they kind of acted like siblings as you got to know them. So I started calling them, we'll call them the Pratt brothers for this show.
Okay, and I think I heard you say this, but this was a medical business?
Sorry, yes, it's an ophthalmology practice.
Okay.
The Pratt brothers wanted to buy out the seller, who we'll call Dr. O'Donnell.
So if I'm tracking right, it seems like you're going with the hot mic references for our characters with the exception of Mr. Africa. Is that right?
Sort of, yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to make sure I'm following the storyline here. So Jimmy Africa is the attorney representing the seller, Dr. O'Donnell. Is that right?
Yes.
And then we represented the buyers, the Pratt brothers.
Yes.
Okay.
Gold star from Michael Kennedy. Put it up there. Dr. O'Donnell had founded this practice, but he hadn't worked in several years. Unfortunately, he had a really bad ski accident on a trip and had not actually come back to the office since that accident or directly spoken with the team since the accident.
Well, that's really unusual. I don't know that I've encountered that scenario before. Was he in a coma or something like that?
No, it was very unusual. You're correct about that. But the Pratt brothers did communicate with him on limited occasions. Mostly they would get emails from him or spoke with his wife, Mrs. O'Donnell, over the phone, but never directly seeing Dr. O'Donnell or speaking with him on the phone.
That begs the question, was Dr. O'Donnell key to the success of this practice?
He was. When he stopped coming to the practice, it became a big strain on the business. The Pratt brothers, although very active at the clinic, they had never really run it. They were just employees there. They weren't in the management side. They didn't do any major strategic moves. So when Dr. O'Donnell stopped communicating with all the employees and patients, the business suffered. The Pratt brothers were forced to try and salvage the relationships with Dr. O'Donnell's patients and staff. This required them to work with new referring physicians because they didn't have the relationships and hire new employees. As once the word kind of got out that Dr. O'Donnell was not coming back in, obviously people started getting nervous, Michael, and because he wasn't responding to those employees, and they thought the practice was going to go under. So many of them started to leave.
Well, yes, that's unusual and sounds a little chaotic.
Yes, very chaotic. And after 2 years of little to no communications and a complete reworking of the employees and the patients of the practice, they were actually finally starting to hum along nicely. I mean, as you can imagine, there was chaos in the beginning, but the Pratt brothers were now making all the decisions on behalf of the practice, but they still weren't owners. And they had this idea that as they were kind of growing it, how to even scale it more. However, they really didn't see a reason to work this hard and just not own the practice at the end of the day.
That makes sense. I mean, they kind of using the term, they had no skin in the game.
Yeah, exactly. And as such, they approached Mrs. O'Donnell and said they would be willing would they be willing to sell 100% of their ownership in the business? And they saw this as an opportunity of a win-win mindset. Dr. O'Donnell had not been part of the business in 2 full years. The Pratt brothers have been finding their way of growing this business. And this way, they could have a smooth transition, allowing Dr. O'Donnell to receive compensation for the business he started, but hadn't been part of in years. And when the Pratt brothers engaged us, so this is when we actually came into it, they had already negotiated all the business terms and conditions for the sale.
Yeah, and we've talked throughout the season so far about Main Street deals versus Wall Street deals, and in a Main Street deal in particular, it's really common for them to come kind of with a handshake type mindset of this is all what we've talked about and what we've agreed to, even though it may not be formalized yet in writing or beyond just conversation. Now, in a Wall Street deal, we may, have them come to us with a signed LOI or to negotiate an LOI. I'm curious, where did you start with this? Did you start with an LOI?
No, the O'Donnells had engaged counsel already, and they had sent the Pratt brothers the first draft of the agreement when we actually got brought in. So no LOI, just emails back and forth, and then bam.
Straight to the documents.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that's, again, you almost can see anything in a Main Street deal. So it's not like we haven't seen that before. But you don't have, the tone setter that we've all talked about with the LOI. You just are straight to the legal documents.
Totally agree.
How were they? How were the agreements?
Well, based on the call I had with the Pratt brothers and what they believed, the agreements were sent did not really connect to what the Pratt brothers were telling us. They were just not there.
Okay. Well, how so?
The agreements were extremely one-sided, with huge penalties to the Pratt brothers and with very aggressive terms. Additionally, there was no non-compete for Dr. O'Donnell on starting a new practice. Obviously, he hadn't been doing it for 2 years, but obviously pretty common. And finally, the documents had appointed Mrs. O'Donnell to the board during the time period in which they would be paying the O'Donnells the purchase price.
Quick follow-up question. Is Mrs. O'Donnell a physician?
No.
Okay. So just as a quick reaction, it's unusual for a seller to not agree to a non-compete. And of course, having a spouse on the board of the organization that's not a physician is sometimes not even compliant. Was this in a CPOM state?
It was not.
Okay. Well, that helps. So on one hand, let's talk a little bit about why in the world they would potentially even ask for that. And what comes to mind is deal structure.
Yep.
So a lot of times, in particular with Main Street deals, you'll have a kind of owner financed element to how the structure of the transaction is. And so it may be, it's a purchase price of X and it's getting paid out over time. And sometimes it even is geared around revenues to determine the repayment schedule.
Right.
And you had said I guess I should have asked this as well. Follow up on Mrs. O'Donnell. Was she on the board?
No, she had nothing to do with it. In fact, she had never discussed any of the communications, before that, except the emails and other conversations when they were discussing deal terms. That was it. So prior to his incident, his accident, Mrs. O'Donnell was not a part of the business.
Okay, I'm curious. Did they find out why she was going to be appointed to the board?
This is where we can go back and bring in Mr. Africa.
Oh.
Now, Mr. Africa had drafted these agreements, and he felt like it would be best that Mrs. O'Donnell be appointed to the board. Hence, he added her onto the agreements.
Okay, well, I'm going to go back to my comment a few moments ago. Was the deal structure such that Miss O'Donnell having a board seat would help create some accountability? Going back to, was payment structure tied to revenue performance or something where she needed to have that visibility?
Yes, the answer is no. There was nothing to the revenue performance. It was a straight purchase price. They had set in advance, so it didn't take into account to the fluctuation in the revenue of the business. And although it was going to be paid out over time, but again, it was at a fixed fee.
Okay, but that doesn't make any sense. So what did you do?
So we do a lot of times what you do. We got on a call with Jimmy Africa, discussed the modifications to the agreement to be closer to the point what the intent of the deal was based on the communications that were between the parties, and one of which the parties we believe would be more satisfactory.
Okay, well, what happened?
It didn't go well. Jimmy Africa started immediately challenging us on every single deal point and kept using terms like these agreements are industry standard. He talked about how he must ensure his clients have the rights fully protected, which I'm not against. And he just about getting he was just about getting the deal done. He was saying about getting it done right. He was making other very aggressive threats throughout the call, which demands honestly going to jeopardize the entire agreement the way he was speaking to us. And during most of the call, Mr. Africa was very rude. As we tried to explain stuff, he would just cut us off. As we attempted to provide more context to the deal itself and the relationship between the parties, he just kept responding literally to almost everything. Well, it's quote market, Michael.
Mm-hmm. If there's any deal attorneys listening right now, they're probably straining their eyes from the massive eye roll to the market and industry standard. I mean, this is a bullying negotiation strategy that some, not most, deal attorneys will use to try to, have this nameless support for their argument and try to, just shut you down in your tracks.
It reminds me of the other nameless attorneys that we don't know.
Yes. Yeah. Like you can't say anything because this is market.
Oh, sorry. Is it market?
It is.
All
yeah.
right. Kennedy, I can't say anything anymore now.
Okay. Well, it does not sound like you were finding common ground with Jimmy Africa and that you were building any rapport with him. What happened next?
So we called the Pratt brothers and provided a summary of the call. And just, we didn't bring up the aggressive nature of Mr. Africa's because we didn't think that had anything to help deal with the deal. And we wanted to get this deal done. So to keep it moving, we kind of let those hot mic moments simmer off the mic with our clients. So our clients were confused as the negotiations with the sellers had gone really smoothly. The practice was thriving under their management, and they're prepared to move on, without a deal if necessary. And they discussed maybe they should just walk away if this continues. Because I should have said this earlier. Our clients had no written agreements with the practice, no employment agreements with the practice, no employee handbooks. They had absolutely nothing to do with the practice in writing, except they showed up and used to work there and then stepped hard just kind of helping manage it after the incident.
Yeah, you should have said that earlier. That's a pretty important piece of information. They had all the cards here, and we just kind of sprung that on us. But that's an interesting twist. I'd say let's go to break, Brad, and when we get back, let's talk about an attorney's interest to protect their client that we've kind of led with, but also to understand the necessity of trying to find alignment when you're negotiating.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
Welcome back to Legal 123's the ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd. Now, Michael, this season, our theme is buying and selling a business. And today's story, we had many different elements of buying and selling in one.
Yeah, and it looks like today's story has an anti-hero as an attorney. Well,
which is unusual. Attorneys normally are heroes.
Yeah, right. So let me try to recap this and see if and Brad, correct me if I miss anything following the bouncing ball. So we have Dr. O'Donnell and Mrs. O'Donnell, and Dr. O'Donnell had this ophthalmology practice. had a terrible accident, and basically stopped coming to the office for presumably for health reasons. No communication.
Mm-hmm.
Our clients, the Pratt brothers,
Yep.
who are not real brothers, but you call them that,
Mm-hmm.
basically took the mess and the chaos and invested in kind of straightening the practice out, resetting it, and growing it back to a healthy state, and actually started to have visions for scaling it and thought, why we're not owners. So let's talk to the O'Donnells and see if they'd be willing to sell since they're out of the game now. And seems like they had a good conversation, went well. And then Dr. O'Donnell and Mrs. O'Donnell hired Jimmy Africa, and he drafted some deal documents that did not align with what your clients understood to be kind of the deal.
Yeah.
And then you confirmed when you had your first call with Jimmy Africa that it was not going to go well as it relates to our anti-hero, because he had a very bullying approach and threw words like market and industry standards and all that at you to make you come down from your position. And then you just dropped a bomb at the very end that is really important. The Pratt brothers had all the leverage because they had nothing binding them from the practice. They had built it all, and they really could just go open up across the street and start doing this under their own practice.
Yeah. And you said this earlier. I mean, the need for to understand that you should be thorough for your clients. So
Right.
we agree with that. But some of these legal demands being made by Mr. Africa, they're really never part of any of these initial discussions between the parties at all. And it makes it harder when our clients feel like they already compromised significantly to move this deal forward because, again, as you said, they helped grow something that they had nothing to do with. And our clients were deal driven focused, which is great. And achieving a fair agreement was what they were trying to do, that they believe benefited both parties. But it appeared the goal to resolve these negotiations amicably and efficiently was really not on the table because Jimmy Africa's, as you kind of were describing, had a very rigid stance in putting the deal at risk based on the way he saw the world.
We talk about this. There's kind of this, reputation that deal attorneys have, and they're either deal makers or deal killers, and you kind of gain that reputation. And the fine line is between being a deal maker and a deal killer is not being an advocate for your client. You have to protect them. But when the attorney starts to make it more about them and they're not listening to the deal, listening to what their clients are saying, and they're basically trying to win, it crosses over.
Yeah.
And it sounds like this is what was happening here, because these demands didn't make any sense for even Jimmy Africa's clients. So what was your first step?
Well, I obviously went back to the clients, and AFA confirmed with the Pratt brothers that none of these deal points are part of any of the arrangement or discussions. And obviously to them, it weren't agreeable. We started having several calls with Mr. Africa and trying to understand his clients' perspectives better. But each time we asked for additional clarification on these deal points, again, we kept, unfortunately, having a screaming gentleman on the other side getting more emotional on the call and less about the actual terms and conditions that were actually in front of us.
It's really important for attorneys to have that emotional intelligence element of keeping your emotions in check. And it sounds like you did a good job with that. And yeah, oftentimes aggressive attorneys like this are using that as a tactic, and they want to provoke a reaction, and they want to stir the pot to gain whatever they're trying to gain. And so it becomes really important to stay focused on the data, the documentation, and being super clear about what are the client's goals, what is the looking for alignment to help get the deal done, and really try to avoid getting sucked into the emotional argument side.
Totally agree. And we started to ask just additional questions and clarification for Jimmy's clients' goals and the constraints. And this was, trying to find some insight of maybe some possible areas that we could compromise on and identify that common ground between our clients, and on those build cooperation atmosphere that would help kind of move this deal forward.
Okay, well, give us some examples of the areas where you could not find alignment.
Besides the fact that Mrs. O'Donnell wanted to be on the board while they're paying the note and complete access to the books and records basically at any time, the other big issues are that they wanted to be, part of the senior. They wanted to be the senior lender here and refuse to provide any subjective rights to a commercial lender.
Yeah, so let's kind of pause for a moment and have a little bit of vocabulary. So let's talk about the importance first about this, them wanting to be the senior lender
Hmm.
perspective and what's the impact there. So a senior lender is sometimes it's called a superior lender, and usually, it's a financial institution, and they have the first priority over the assets and cash flows of a borrower, of the collateral in the event you have to collect on
Right.
that, whether it's a liquidation or bankruptcy or some other type of default, and um, and so they have the right to be paid back first before the other creditors. That would be the junior lenders in
Hmm.
the kind of this hierarchy of people that are in line to collect on the assets if there's a default.
Right.
And so being senior comes with lower risk because if the borrower defaults, they're going to get the first fruits of whatever's left over in the assets. Um, and subordinated rights or junior rights on is a lower rank, and so they're lower in line and their risk is much higher. And so this can have a really big impact what they're asking for
Right.
on what the Pratt brothers would be able to do with the business.
Yeah. So, as you can tell, by having that subordinate, by having that debt in front of them, that was a big issue, and it is making their ability, the Pratt brothers, to really grow difficult. And so, making this demand on the Pratt brothers was going to hurt the ability for them to ever get a commercial loan. And remember, the beginning of the story was all about them, their idea of scaling. If they couldn't grow the business, they didn't even see a reason to buy it.
Yeah, I mean, a bank is not going to agree not to be the senior lender
Yeah.
if they do it. So that you to your point, Brad, they would be signing off on not being able to borrow money
Right, until they
outside.
pay this off. Right. So, as you can imagine, the Pratt brothers, they reached a point where the demand jeopardized the entire agreement. They were ready to walk away. The practice is thriving under their management. They were prepared to move without a deal if necessary and really just leave and start their own practice. They felt hurt that the O'Donnells didn't see the benefit of the deal that was offered, or much less agreed upon.
Yeah, expectations are a beast in an M&A deal. I mean, we talk about expectations in all types of circumstances, from physician employment agreements to any type of relationship. It makes it more tricky in M&A because these are emotional, once in a lifetime events for the parties from a
Hmm.
business perspective. I
Sure.
mean, you don't sell your business that often, most people, and you don't buy businesses that often. And so emotions run high, and when expectations are not met, I mean, it's a perfect storm.
Yeah, and with no employment agreements, no written agreements between the parties, our clients decided that they were going to terminate the deal and start their own business.
So, this is an example how, Jimmy Africa's tactics backfired because he was so focused on winning and maybe he would say protecting his client's interests, but he was doing so without listening to what his clients actually wanted, that and not realizing where his client's negotiation position was, that
Yeah.
they did not hold the cards in this situation. And so the deal died.
Yes and no.
Okay.
Once we gave notice that our employees were going to leave, all hell broke loose. A few days, Jimmy Africa was making that he was going to get lawsuits against the Pratt brothers, but eventually he was able to realize that they didn't have any. He didn't have any foundation since they were never owners, never officers. They had no agreements with the practice. And finally, Dr. O'Donnell actually sent an email and requested a call.
The same Dr. O'Donnell that they had not spoken to?
The same.
Okay.
So they had an all hands on call, which means the attorneys and clients all got in the same call. We discussed the outstanding issues, knowing that the Pratt brothers had given notice and that Jimmy Africa had nearly killed this deal with his aggressive tactics. Dr. O'Donnell and his wife basically agreed on the call to 90% of the changes the Pratt brothers requested, because much of it, actually to the chagrin of their attorney who rejected a few of them, because that got them back to where the deal was really starting. And the final set of documents kind of reflected that. And they agreed to sale. At the end, it worked out, but Jimmy Africa almost had to be sidelined to make it work. So, Michael, we're at time. So what are your final thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, just one quick final thought as a wrap up. This is a great lesson on the importance of communication and the emotional intelligence that I mentioned to effectively negotiate an M&A deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Michael, next Wednesday, you and I will be back. We'll discuss the impact on a seller when, during the due diligence phase, you lie to the counsel. Thanks again for joining us today. And remember, if you like this episode, please subscribe, make sure to give us a 5-star rating, and share with your friends.
You can also sign up for the ByrdAdatto newsletter by going to our website at ByrdAdatto.com.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.